And before doing that, I just wanted to remind you about what our speakers spoke about. So we started this morning with Professor Bob Miles, and he was talking about climate change and what it means for the pastoral industry. And he had quite a bit of detail in there that gave you impacts, measured impacts as he saw them. And then after that we went to methane emissions with Dr. Ed Charmley, and you'll remember that Ed told us about where the emissions are coming from, the amounts of them, and also talked about the idea that it didn't mean that we shouldn't be doing anything about it. And after that we had a break and we went to the emissions comparison, stock versus no stock. And what you heard from Dr. Stephen Bray there was about the idea of, well, what happens if you have stock on and what happens if you don't? What happens to the carbon? What happens to the methane? What's all the figures that are involved in it? And he came down with some figures at the end of it for you to look at and consider as you make decisions. Most recently after lunch we went to soil carbon, helping to reverse the degradation of formerly productive land, address biomass loss and build ecosystem resilience with Tony Lovell. And you'll remember the photographs that Tony showed that were within hundreds of metres of each other under the same sort of conditions. And then lastly we spoke with Alan Lauder, and you heard Alan talk about the strategies for managing for climate change, and the fact that how for him it's become the idea of managing soil carbon rather than managing pastures or managing cattle or even managing finances. So they were our speakers from today, and you have an opportunity now to ask them something that you hadn't asked earlier. And also then if you've got, so then also something that you might want to build in that the whole panel can respond to. So I'd like you to say, just to ask you please to stand up, just say who you are so we know where the question's coming from, and if you're directing it to someone in particular, please do so. If not, you can just direct it to the panel. Errol, I saw your hand first, and Sally, I saw you second, so that's where it's going to second, but that'll be the start of our questions.
Yeah,
gentlemen.
Errol Entrigan. Just a question, I don't know what research has been done on it, but using urea as a feed supplement, well, I can't remember, I think it might have been Bob, I'm not too sure. Someone said in the 70s there was research done on sheep that didn't emit NH4, which probably coincided with in the early to late 60s, 70s when urea was first used as a feed supplement out here. Whether that could possibly have anything to do with the emissions, and also would urea supplement increase the ammonia emissions from a rumen? And I think with pretty much all the panel today, the main thing that sticks out is what we've got to be very aware of is total grazing pressure, which is one of the few things at this stage is very difficult to manage. And I think, Alan's, if anyone's here wants to spell their country, we do produce a lot of hay at Cesponia.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that. It was me that mentioned the sheep in the 70s there in Armidale. It was actually it wasn't urea that they were emitting. It wasn't ammonia. It was methane. But so they were, for some reason, some sheep didn't seem to be producing methane when you would expect they would be doing. We don't really understand why. But if you remember the comment about human beings, there are some that do and some that don't. But the question about urea and feeding urea, obviously, it's an absolute boon in this time of year when you've got dry feed with very low protein content. If you can get some urea in there, you're going to get better animal productivity and performance. And really, as a number of us have said today, it's this improved performance means lower greenhouse gas emissions per unit of product, and that really is a very important factor for this part of the world, I think. So it's not that the urea are doing anything magical, it's just making the cattle grow better or lose less weight so that they are more productive. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that and pass it on. There was a bit more to that question, I think, for somebody else.
Okay, someone else to take up.
Ammonia emissions from feeding urea?
Yeah, does urea increase emissions?
Well, if you feed too much ammonia, you're going to kill the animals, so that'll solve your emissions problems. So, some diets you do get fairly high ammonia produced in the rumen, and you can get some of that emitted from the animal. But generally, you're talking about very high levels. Then you're really at the level where it's beyond the practical limits of feeding. So, if you're getting those sorts of issues, you got a problem.
But it does stimulate the bugs in the rumen, and the bugs are the ones that...
Oh, absolutely. What happens, like urea is just nitrogen and hydrogen. It's a very simple molecule. And what happens is when you feed urea to ruminants, the rumen bugs take that urea and convert it into amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. So you're taking a very low quality nitrogen-containing compound and turning it into high-value protein. It's a bit like with the grass takes a CO2 from the atmosphere and makes carbohydrate. Well, the rumen bugs can take urea and turn it into protein, and it's that protein that bugs need to grow and multiply. And in a feed, dry feed like we've got this time of year, the bugs are basically starving, so the rumens turned right down, not very functional. And one of the first things that happens is those bugs that break down the fibre, which is what you really need, because the fibre is, the grass is 80-odd% fibre this time of year anyway. So those bugs that break down the fibre don't have the ability to do it because they're starved of nitrogen. So by putting a bit of urea in there, you're giving them that boost, and then you get the rumen going, and that's how you get your increased productivity.